Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Before we get too far into the video, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that really helps to get my channel promoted, and I do appreciate that. I also love comments, so if you have a question about the video, a suggestion for another video, constructive criticism, or you just want to tell me how you do things, I always love to find those things out, so leave a comment. I've been kind of getting into the Brutalist period of architecture and applying it to jewelry, and I've done a few homages to some other Brutalist jewelry I've seen, and that's what I'm going to do today. Is I'm going to do a Brutalist ring that I saw somewhere online or something similar to it. It's not going to be exactly, but all credit goes to the original artist. I don't know who it was. I think it's an antique, but it's cool. It's got some tubes and squares on top, and it's angular and interesting looking. So I'm not going to put any stones in it on this one. I thought about tube mounting some stones, but I decided against it because they're pretty small tubes. So maybe next time. But before we get started, I wanted to thank some groups of people. My patrons over on Patron are my core group of supporters, and I truly appreciate them. They have provided me with financial support as well as creating this really wonderful community where I enjoy spending time interacting with them, and it's nice to see them interacting with each other and sharing ideas and their work and stuff. It's nice. So thanks for making it that way, you guys. The other group is my YouTube subscribers, and we just passed 18,200, which is awesome. Thank you so much for that. Thank you also for the really meaningful comments. It's really nice to hear that people are getting something valuable out of these videos, and sometimes some of your comments are really moving, and I appreciate that. It makes me feel like I'm doing something right here. I do also appreciate your financial contributions as well. The buy me a coffee and super thanks really help with the cost of materials, so thanks for that. All right, well, let's get started on this video. This is one of my design idea sketchbooks you can get on my merch store. I like this one because it's got a useful chart on the back which has fractions of an inch to decimals to millimeters, which I use pretty frequently. There's several other ones with other useful information on the backs as well. You should check those out. They also provide a nice place to draw up your designs in and keep a record of, which I find very useful anymore. So there's my little wolf ones from yesterday. Okay, so this is kind of what I had in mind. It's going to be made out of sheet primarily, 2 pieces of 18 gauge sheet. This is a kind of a top view, and I'm going to line this inside ring here, make that out of 22 gauge, I believe, and so it'll be between there to create the little ring part. And then in the corners I'm going to put some pieces of square, like 10 gauge square wire to give it support. Up here, I think what I'm going to do, I haven't quite decided, but I think I'm going to put a piece of like 22 or 18 or some kind of sheet right there. I haven't decided yet. And maybe a little bit of 14 gauge square wire to create a border on either edge. And then we're going to put some of these little tubes and some square wire. I have 2 different sizes of tubes here. I don't even know what they are. This one's about 3 millimeter on the outside diameter, but you could use whatever size tubes you want. And I'm going to cut off a whole bunch of different length ones and solder them into that little cavity that we create at the top of this ring. So I think it should be fun and a good, I don't know, maybe an intermediate-ish kind of project. I've already cut out the squares just for time's sake out of this 18 gauge sheet, and I cut these ones to be about 21.5 millimeters square, and I've also I scribed an X from corner to corner on this one to get pretty close to the center of it. And I think my first step is going to be taking this 22 gauge ring that I just made and soldering it down to one of these. And then I think what we should do is probably saw the inside out so we have it hollow on that side, and then solder on this, the second one like this, and then saw this inside piece out, and then we'll start building the rest of this stuff. So we need to get this into that shape with a ring between it, like that, with a hole going through it. So let's start there, and I think we can use this X here as our starting point. 18 gauge is 1.02 millimeters deep, and 22 is 0.66, I think, if I remember. And those are the things we're using right now. 10 gauge square wire is 2.59 millimeters, if I remember right. 14 gauge square is 1.6. So I think I want this to be a little bit towards the bottom, not quite centered. I want it centered this way, but I want it to be closer to the edge down there so that I have a little room to do that stuff up top. So let's kind of get it centered sideways as close as we can. That's pretty good. So I think I'm going to go with that. And what we'll do is we'll flux it and put some hard silver sheet solder tucked up against the edges on the inside, and we'll get this whole thing to flow. Speaking of which, if you've never been to my channel, I use hard silver sheet solder for most everything. I occasionally use some other stuff. I use a liquid flux that I dribble on with a dropper bottle anymore, and that's nice. I have a Silversmith model. It's their acetylene air torch. It just draws in atmospheric air to mix with the acetylene, and it's hotter than a propane torch, not as hot as an oxyacetylene torch, but it's perfect for silversmithing. And I use a #1 tip on it, and that's the primary questions people usually ask me. I do occasionally get asked about these. These are Fisker's craft shears that I use to cut a lot of thin sheet. You can actually cut up to about 18 gauge sheet with it, but it drastically reduces the lifespan of these things because that's really pushing what they can do. But other than that, they're great little shears. They're not very expensive either, and they're pretty widely available. It's Valentine's Day today, so I picked something that's not super complicated because I want to have time to make my wife a nice dinner. So rarely get to do something nice for her. I put 6-ish. Now, this is 18 gauge sheet on the bottom, and there's a lot more mass in that than there is in the little ring that I have on here, which is only 22 gauge. But it's exposed to the flame up top here pretty readily, versus the sheet, which is kind of protected from the flame by the bezel. Or not, it's not a bezel, I guess. The ring itself up top here. It looks like I'm doing a bezel. So you got to get them both up to that 1450 degrees though, and it takes longer to get the sheet on the bottom usually. And it's also more difficult to kind of get the heat in there without overheating the top piece. So that's kind of the trick with this. Kind of avoid it. You can get underneath it and do it from the bottom sometimes if you want to. If you have a setup where you can do that. You can also tip it up and heat from the bottom once everything's kind of stuck in place. That went okay, I think. We'll cool it off and take a look at the seam and make sure we don't have any gaps. Okay, let's just go over and saw that center out. I think that'll be a good idea. I think we got a good seam all the way around. So I drilled a little hole through there with my drill, and I'm going to run this. This is a 00. mostly because that's what was on here. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to clean that up with the Dremel just a little bit with an abrasive white silicone wheel, and then we'll mount that other side. Okay, so I got it all kind of cleaned up on the inside, so it's flush with the sheet along the edge, and I ran the file across here just to make sure it's nice and clean, and I think we just need to kind of line it up as best we can, probably along the bottom, I think. There's going to be some slight variation because I cut those by hand. Let's get it. Yeah, like that. And then let's flux it, and then I'm going to put some solder on the inside like I did before. I'm going to cut this out and then file these so that it's a perfectly symmetrical. At least that is my hope. So I'll be right back. So I've done two things in addition to cleaning this up with a Dremel and straightening up the edges. Is I cut two pieces of 10 gauge square wire, just about the right length to fit right in there, and those are going to go on the bottom corners. And then I cut a piece of 18 gauge sheet, the same width as I made the band, and I just used my little, most people call these dividers, just to kind of scribe a line like that and then cut it off and file it till it fit just in there. And I'm going to solder it in there so it leaves just a little lip up there that I'm going to put a piece of 14 gauge square wire, I think, as the border. And then we'll get everything cleaned up. So let's see if we can get these all soldered in there. Something I do that I find really useful is called pick soldering. It's where you pick up a little piece on the end of a titanium or a tungsten pick like this, heat the piece up to the soldering temperature and just touch it where you want it to go. And if everything's the right temperature, it should just jump right in there. If you're interested, I will put a link up there to a good video about it. It's one of those skills that really makes a difference as far as making you move up in your abilities, because it really allows you to control where your solder goes and how much you're putting there. We'll just pick up a little bit here, theoretically. The thing that I do most often that's a mistake is I stick the pick in too soon when I'm placing the solder because I haven't quite gotten the piece up to the right soldering temperature. But you can kind of watch the other solder joints when they start to look a little shiny again. They're pretty much there. I think those are in. Let's cut a couple of pieces of 14 gauge square wire and solder them into those spots, and then we'll cut everything off and file it flush again and see how it looks. Well, we'll see if we can get it in the right spot there. So now I have a little tray that I can put things in. So let me get this trimmed up and filed up a little bit. You can just use your saw to do that if you want to. Alright. Probably after I get all these soldered in, I'm probably going to round these corners on the bottom a little bit to make them a little less severe. And then we'll get everything pickled. So let's go over and cut a few pieces of tubing, and then I'll probably do the rest off camera and we'll start soldering them in. So, I'm just going to cut some random sizes that are not super long. And this is the wider tube. I could go crawl around and try and find that. Alright, let's do a few of these smaller ones too. This is, I don't know what diameter this is, but it looks like about 1 millimeter. Maybe 2 millimeters. Okay, I'm also going to cut a few 14 gauge square wire as well for some variety. So I'll be right back. So I have a bunch of various tubes and square wires over here of different lengths, and I think what I'm going to do is I've already fluxed this, and I'm going to put a little bit of medium paste solder on the bottom of each of these and place them in gradually. You have to be a little careful with these tubes. If you squeeze them with the tweezers while they're hot, you can squish them a little bit. So. Square wire, I should say. Alright, I'm going to cool that off and make sure everything stays where it's supposed to stay. And then I think we'll probably pickle it after that. Okay, well, like I said, I'm going to round these corners just a little bit on the bottom. Get this pickled and I'll polish it up and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, well, I think that's going to be all right. It'll be an interesting sort of arty ring.
So someone will love that. Let's get that cleaned up and I'll show you the final product in a bit. So I just wanted to show you the final product. It came out. I got a real high shine on the outside. And then on the inside I used a diamond burr to kind of abrade it in a relatively symmetrical way in order to kind of... It's a place where you can't really polish very well. And so I thought I would just run with it and go with kind of more of an abrasive look on the inside, which kind of goes with the Brutalist theme. But yeah, I like it. That's pretty much what I was thinking. So I'll get some better pictures and put them at the end.
Okay, well that was Brutalist ring number 4 or 5 or something like that. I really enjoy making these types. They're interesting and different and sort of jarring. And so if you enjoyed it, make sure to hit the like button before you leave. And also check out my main channel page. I have 443 videos, I think, last I looked. I've been doing 3 per week for about 3 years, so there's quite a collection over there. There's a whole bunch of different projects over there at all different skill levels, so you should check that out. There's almost certainly something else you'll find useful. Also, make sure to subscribe to my channel. It doesn't cost anything, and you'll be able to find me more easily. So, last thing is, make sure to hit the video description down below. There's some important links there. There's a link to my ebook, which I just finished. If you want to have a catalog and a guide to all of the videos I did last year, it's a great resource. It puts right at your fingertips 170 some projects, so it's pretty handy. There's also a link to my merch store where you can get those nice design idea books if you want to get yourself a nice a drawing pad to put your ideas into. And there's a link to my Patreon as well if you want to find out more about that community. So, all right, well, thanks for coming. Take care. Happy silversmithing.